Roberson. Hello, this is Sharon Roberson. The webinar will start in about 3 minutes. We're allowing people to come into the room. Hello, everyone. My name is Sharon Roberson, and I am President and CEO of the YWCA Nashville and Middle Tennessee. Welcome to our Stand Against Racism series. We have a very wonderful topic today, something that we know that our community needs to hear. This is Domestic Violence Awareness Month, and the YWCA has participated in many events, but none is so important as this week, which is part of the National YWCA's agenda. As we talk through this experience, what we would do for this special week, we knew that we wanted to bring in the full survivor experience. We wanted everyone in our community to have the advantage of understanding what it truly means to be a survivor of domestic violence. This year's theme for the national program is resilience, or beyond resilience, from surviving to thriving, because that is part of our mission, to make sure, or to help, that is, survivors to thrive. We want to thank the Nissan Foundation for making this program possible. We also want to thank many of the victims and survivors that have contributed to this program. Today, we're going to discuss a topic that I've wanted to have us examine for a long time. The reason that we do these is to educate the public so that those in our atmosphere, those in our community, can go back into the community with the understanding of a very significant issue. When I was preparing for this, I started reading about women who are criminalized because of their status as a survivor. And they actually use a term for those who research this, survivor defendant. And I had not heard that, but it is so true that many women who are survivors end up being defendants. One of the things that we're going to talk about is how the trauma of being a victim of domestic violence. And when we say that for these purposes, we're really talking about intimate partner violence, because that is a subset of domestic violence. However, a lot of times those terms are used interchangeably when you talk about domestic violence. We're talking about a relationship between those individuals. Also, we need to understand one of the reasons that we are specifically talking about Black women is because Black women are almost 3 times more likely to die in the hands of a current ex-partner than members of other races. So we need to pay special attention to our sisters. I'm going to start off by letting each panel member introduce themselves, giving us their name, the work that they do, and tell us how they believe how race and sex can impact criminalization. I'll start with Brianna.
Right. Thank you, Sharon. And I first want to say thank you to YWCA for the invitation to be a panelist, and also for hosting such an important conversation, which you already touched on, Sharon. And I'm glad that we are engaging in this discussion. So my name is Brianna Perry. My pronouns are she, her, and I'm the co-executive director of Healthy and Free Tennessee. And Healthy and Free Tennessee is a statewide network working to grow a movement for reproductive justice across race, gender, and class. And so we push back against existing systems of oppression. And we also use innovation to create new systems to meet the needs of all Tennesseans, including those who are impacted by gender-based violence. And so I do want to start by saying that for me, criminalization is a form of racialized and gender-based violence, and that the conditions which are tied to gender-based and racialized oppression lead to criminalization and contact with the criminal legal system. And so last year, I wrote an article that was published in Prism, which is a news outlet that showcases social justice issues across the country. I wrote an article on reproductive abuse and coercion in jails and prisons. And through that process, I found some horrifying statistics. And so some include, in 2017, the imprisonment rate for Black women was twice that of white women. And also, Black women had the lowest annual incomes prior to incarceration. So going back to the conditions, when we think about the intersections of race, gender, and class, that leads someone with contact with the criminal legal system. And so because Black women had the lowest annual incomes before becoming incarcerated, this made them more vulnerable to manipulation by prosecutors, to enter into a plea bargain, and unable to pay bail. And I also have witnessed these experiences firsthand by participating in the Black Women's Bailout, which I can talk more about later, since 2017, and I've seen firsthand how the oppressions that come with race and gender impact criminalization.
Let me ask Judge Anna Escobar the same question with a little bit of a difference in seeing women, especially victims of domestic violence, coming through the courtroom. Are there ways, and I know that you are a very thinking judge that always looks to better the system. We've had those conversations, and we're very fortunate to have you sitting on the bench. But those where race and sex could impact how the system is structured, how they can lead to criminalization of women and or women of color.
Well, my name is Anna Escobar. Thank you for having me on this panel. It means a lot to me. The YWCA has been very impactful in my personal life. So I believe in the mission and support the mission. I preside over Division 3 of General Sessions here in Davidson County. I'm one of 3 judges that hear domestic violence cases 8 months out of the year. And I also preside over the Human Trafficking Survivors Treatment Court, which helps human trafficking survivors that are criminally justice involved. And I will say, now that I preside over a treatment court, it is very apparent to me that when women are not able to afford things or be able to empower themselves, that they do get not stuck, but are forced to take plea bargains that will negatively affect them along the line. And that is for sure. The wonderful thing about a treatment court is that it slows down that process. It gives the person time to be able to access different services from other nonprofits that they may not be able to have access to. And then at the very end of successfully completing, the case is dismissed. And oftentimes, things don't go well the first time, but the beauty of a treatment court is that the person is given time to fail and then get up and try again. I wish everyone was able to have that opportunity, because people are not able to access things that would help the root cause of the issues that are happening. So I wish that there were more resources in our general sessions courts and our criminal courts that didn't criminalize things, but rather helped empower women and men, frankly, to stop their cycle. For instance, we have so many people in the criminal justice system that have experienced child abuse. And that, as everyone knows, those ACEs scores just go, up the roof, and really don't impact a person in their future. So if we could only get therapy and resources for everyone, what a blessing, instead of criminalizing that hurt that people have. I don't know if I answered your question, but that's my answer.
Oh, very good, and very good information. In fact, it brings up an instance yesterday. We had a vigil at our Weaver Center, and the story you just told about the child sex abuse leading to being a victim of domestic violence or intimate partner violence was the story that one woman actually told us. So we do know, both from the data as well as from our personal knowledge of those of us who work in this field, that that does take place and that does happen. Okay, we'll go to Latoya Townsend. She's with the Family Safety Center. Latoya, give us your name and tell us a little bit about the Family Safety Center, and tell us how you believe that race and sex can impact criminalization.
Thank you, Sharon. It's always a pleasure to partner with the YWCA on all initiatives, but none is dearer to my heart than eliminating racism in all factors of our work. So my name is Latoya Townsend. I'm the Director of Training, Outreach, and Development for the Metro Government of Nashville, Davidson County's Office of Family Safety. We oversee the services provided in Nashville's Family Justice Centers, and there are two. There's the Family Safety Center located on 610 Murfreesboro Pike. We can be reached at 615-880-1100. We're the largest family justice center in the country. And the idea behind that is to be a super target, if you will, for victims of interpersonal violence. So rather than victims who are in need of advocacy services, connection to places like the YWCA for shelter and other resources, rather than have to go all over the city for those services, you're able to come to a one-stop shop to receive assistance, whether if it's direct advocacy by our staff or referrals and soft handoffs to our lovely nonprofit partners. So again, 615-880-1100, 610 Murfreesboro Pike. And it's the Foster Avenue bus stop on Murfreesboro Pike if you use public transport. So why race and sex are important when it comes to addressing interpersonal violence? I think it's important to explore those intersections because, you know, Nashville has a really robust, great running machine. We have specialized judges such as Judge Escobar and Judge Walker and Judge Robinson that specialize in addressing interpersonal violence. We have the Interpersonal Crimes Branch of the Metro Police Department under the leadership of Chief Drake. We have specialized unit in the DA's office. We have family justice centers and nonprofits. All of that is wonderful and is great. And there are people who do not wish to and will never wish to engage in our traditional systems of service. So all of that is great if you want advocacy and you want to go, you know, file for an order of protection and you want to go to court, and there's all this great support available that always needs to be there. Don't get me wrong. However, we have to expand our reach and our vision for services and safety for people who have been marginalized by the criminal justice system, current day and historically, in order to ensure that all victims of interpersonal violence are safe. And that isn't just those victims that fit in those cute little boxes of victimhood, it's everyone. It's the person who's the victim who's also the defendant. So expanding those services that and our reach and ideas about what safety looks like for all victims is dire.
All right, well, thank you, because what we're reaching for as a community is to make sure that everyone has the support, and this has come out in every speaker so far. Now we'll go to Ms. Dawn Harrington. Dawn, can you give us what you do and also how you believe that race and sex can impact your interaction with the criminal justice system?
Hey, yes, I did. Thank you so much. Dawn Harrington. I am the executive director of Free Hearts. Free Hearts is an organization that's led by formerly incarcerated women that provide support, education, advocacy, and organizes families that are impacted by incarceration. Our ultimate goals are reuniting families and strengthening communities. And just a little bit of the work that we do participatory defense, where we are organizing with families across the state to impact the outcomes of their cases. We're, as a part of that, we're bailing some of the people in our participatory defense out, including some criminalized survivors. We're doing clemency, which one of our advocating for clemency for some of the women that are incarcerated in our organization. And one of our main categories is criminalized survivors. We're also working on changing policy. We do direct services and community building and building infrastructure through cooperative development. And, you know, I definitely believe that race and sex impact criminalization. And I could just use myself first and then kind of talk about what we see in our work. So my charge was a gun charge, right? And, you know, it was never asked of me, you know, why I even needed a gun, nor was it element on a case. On the case, you know, it really doesn't matter. But, you know, at any point, you know, somebody should realize, like, why would I feel like I need it? And I had just got out of a violent relationship. I was also just recently sexually assaulted in my work. But none of that, you know, mattered when it came to coming into the court system. And so, you know, it's like, you know, sometimes the outcome of it, which, like, in the situation that we're dealing with right now, it's like the outcome you'll get criminalized for, but it's not element of the case to dig deeper into the why. And a lot of times, you know, something that I think, you know, with us being in the Bible Belt, I think that because it also shocks me, and the different people that we're in front of, like, advocating for survivors, whether it's in front of a legislator, whether it's in front of a court, a district attorney, or in front of the parole board. It's like, you know, one, you know, it's confusing to me because it's like a lot of times we hear things that are like, oh, okay, you know, they, you know, should have done something, or they put a thought or idea into somebody's head. And I think a lot of times in the Bible Belt, it goes to, honestly, like, at the core to the story of Adam and Eve. And like this idea that Eve, like, you know, that we're supposed to be responsible. And so, you know, what we see often is women that are blamed for the actions of their abusers or other men. And I will say that, you know, the majority of women that are incarcerated are survivors of sexual and domestic violence. And, you know, I remember when I was incarcerated, just sitting around, I remember one day we were just sitting in the pod and, you know, telling our stories, and just some of the most horrific stories of things that women have been through. And, you know, and the statistics match that. And what we see every day in our work is, you know, for example, bail amounts that are the exact same charges, for example, for white women and Black women, and they're being totally different, like 50 to 100,000, you know, and over here we're talking about 500, you know, 500,000 or more. And we also see a lot of sentences for failure to protect your children from and charges and people being sentenced for failure to protect. But in one particular situation that I'm thinking about, a white woman with the exact same charge had 6 years at like 30%. And one of the women that's in our community that we're working with, 28 years at 100% was as far down as they can go. And we were really pushing. And we see this often. We still have some ongoing cases. And make no mistake about it, like, in those situations, we think neither the white women or the Black women should be incarcerated. However, like, we definitely see there's a huge disparity all the time in our state when it comes to the criminalization of survivors, and they shouldn't be, criminalized or sent to jail in the first place. And a lot of the resources that are available are connected to the criminal justice system, where we need resources that are outside of the system as well, community-based solutions. And so, yes, that's just a little bit about how race and sex can impact criminalization, and we see it all the time, and I'm definitely appreciative for having this conversation.
Okay, I'm going to read you all a couple of statements. Now, I was to ask you about an instance in your experience with victims where race and gender would impact outcomes, but I'm going to read a few statements before we take on that question. One, violence perpetrated against women and girls can put them at risk of for incarceration because their survival strategies are routinely criminalized. And that's what Dawn was touching on. From being coerced into criminal activities by their abusers to fighting back to defend the lives of their children, survivors of domestic violence can find themselves trapped between the danger of sometimes life-threatening violence and the risk of spending the rest of their lives in prison. Second statement, Rita Smith, who is a dear friend, who is the executive director of the National Coalition Against Domestic Violence. She asserts that she's much an expert in this field, most women who kill in self-defense end up in prison. And that's where we get to survivor defendants. All right, let's go back to that, and I'll start with Ms. Perry, Brianna again. Can you add something to what I've just read? Do you know of an instance or even some data about the experience with victims where race or gender could impact their outcomes in the criminal justice system?
Yeah, I can think of so many instances. So like in my introduction, I talked about how I participated in the Black Mamas Bailout since 2017. And the Black Mamas Bailout is a tactic that's used, and you have the National Bailout Collective, so many formations, organizations done say, like, Free Hearts bail folks out as well, to highlight the injustices of the money bail system, which Don has touched on. And so I've participated in bailouts in Memphis and Nashville, and I would say like overwhelmingly, like the women that we bailed out, like had been victims of domestic violence. Like there was one woman that we bailed out in 2017. Also, as I think about this, like it's the intersection of race, gender, and class. These women, they're poor, working class Black women. And like, again, those experiences how it leads to contact with the criminal legal system on top of like surviving abuse and violence, like intimate partner violence. And so one woman we bailed out, she had experienced domestic violence. She was in jail because she was trespassing on private property, meaning that she was sleeping outside because she didn't have a place to stay, and how because she experienced domestic violence, it just took everything from her, right? She had no money, no resources, no family, and she didn't have a place to stay and was arrested because she was this poor Black woman. Another instance I'm thinking of, this mama that we bailed out, she was in jail for a drug charge. And we provide supportive services through this, right? It's not just like we bail them out and that's it. We try to meet their needs. And in conversations with her, she was like, was in an active domestic violence situation. She couldn't stay with her mom because her mom was afraid that the boyfriend would come there. She did not have custody of her children. So I want to add that into the conversation as well. Like these survivors in coming in contact with the criminal legal system, they also like lose custody of their children and the impact of that. So she didn't have custody of her children. She didn't have housing. We were trying to put her up in a hotel, but also find like sustainable housing. And, she was okay for a while, and she, ultimately relapsed after, I want to say, about 6 or 7 months. And, was still trying to, she ended up like re-engaging in a relationship with this abusive partner. And so I think about these examples, but again, I really want to uplift like the conditions that lead to this. And again, how it is not a coincidence that like, survivors of intimate partner violence, gender-based violence, come into the in contact with the criminal legal system. And these are like Black women, women of color. And so thinking about the systems of oppression that Black women experience, beforehand, before even coming into contact, and just how that becomes exacerbated. And so those are some examples, again, I think of so many that come to mind when I think of that question.
Okay, we'll go to Judge Escobar. I know that there are a lot of things, and I was actually on a panel with another general sessions judge, and I know that judges sometimes have to take the cases as they're put forward and have to work with the system. But if you were dreaming of a system and we had unlimited resources to help women, poor women, Black women, marginalized women, survivors, to have a better outcome in the criminal justice system, what would you look for?
Well, once again, I will bring up my example of the treatment courts. I wish we could, if you came, and I invite anyone to come to General Sessions Court and sit there, it's difficult to watch because there are 20 or 30 cases in one day, and they're being kind of moved very quickly. And as the judge, you either find out if it's going to end up in a plea bargain. You have no idea how the parties came to agree on this one plea bargain, or you have no idea what the criminal history is. So either things happen like that, or if there's a hearing, and that's when we get into rules of evidence. And like you said, judges get what they're given. I'll tell you, what's most frustrating right now is that so much evidence is on victims' phones. You would not believe how many crimes could be solved with phones. But there's no way our police department can download every single phone. I think their priority is murders, overdoses, those kind of things. And so much evidence is there. Wouldn't it be fantastic if there was a resource for victims to be able to prove their cases with much more evidence, to collect those eyewitnesses that could come and help them testify and corroborate their case. Wouldn't it be wonderful if women, most of our victims are women, could come to court feeling empowered because their basic needs are being met? And I wanted to kind of throw some light on women who are undocumented. As a prosecutor, I prosecuted domestic violence cases, and women who are undocumented so many times are pressured by the family of the defendant. If you do this, if you go through this, he will get deported. What are you doing to us? What are you doing to your children? So there's so much stress put on an undocumented victim, so that when, as a judge, sometimes I see plea bargains and I think this is being done so that the person cannot be deported, and it's not great for the victim. Second thing I wanted to kind of shed light on is that so many people perceive that victims are just defenseless women, damsels in distress. It is okay for a victim to fight back, and some victims are going to fight back. They're going to defend themselves. They're going to react, and that doesn't mean that they're not that they are the primary aggressor. And so sometimes, unfortunately, the situation that has been building up for months, years, unfortunately, when the police is called, what gets documented is that victim's response for those years of trauma and abuse, that they finally react. And so I try very hard when I'm hearing a case, if a victim has reacted, that doesn't mean they're not a victim, right? So I do want to shed light on that sometimes defense attorneys will bring out that the female victims have responded, have reacted, have slapped, have pushed, and that, you know, how could this be? And so then you see plea bargains kind of not be as strong because the victim reacted. So I guess what I'm trying to say is that we need to get the idea of victims being, you know, these defenseless damsels in distress. We need to forget about that, because women should defend themselves, right? In a safe way, but you know, so that's how I would love for women or victims to come into court having those basic needs that they need to live, to feel safe for their children and themselves, to feel empowered to come into court and be able to advocate for what they need in that relationship, rather than coming in without those things, which puts them at a disadvantage when the negotiations are happening. I hope that answers your question.
Yes, and one thing you brought up that was very important is this issue of primary aggressor. And I don't know if we have the opportunity to get into that, but for the audience, when the police show up, they have to make an evaluation. And as I understand it, and correct me, anyone on the panel if I am wrong, the law is such that they can make a judgment call to determine. It doesn't necessarily have to be the person that called. It doesn't necessarily have to be the person that threw the last lick. They're supposed to determine this concept of primary aggressor. However, I will say that it does appear as though it is easier to just determine the person that hit first or blew up or whoever left scars on the other person at that time as a primary aggressor, and not look at the history of domestic violence in the household. And if this is the first time the police have ever been called, the person who is actually the victim may end up getting arrested because of this determination that the police make on that spot. Let's go to you, Latoya Townsend. Add some other flavor to this concept of the experience of victims and how we can go about this process of helping victims based on their race or gender having better outcomes in the criminal justice system.
Absolutely. So if I had my dream, we would have a parallel system at place, independent but collaborative with the traditional criminal justice system, that serves those primary folks who do not, due to that historical oppression, due to their lived experience, due to the history of even policing in this country. The formal creation of police in this country was designed to police Black bodies. It wasn't designed to keep society safe. It was designed to have power and control over a group of people. And so knowing that that is the history of these systems, and of course they have absolutely evolved, and there are a lot of good mechanisms that have grown and a lot of not so good that have gone away. However, that wasn't that long ago, right? And so when we have this expectation that the way to safety and the way to justice only lies within the systems that we have, we're missing a great pot of people. And when we think about victims that are in need of support and are reaching out, but also have the boundary and the rightful fear of, I can't engage in this system because I don't want to call the police because I don't want my spouse killed. I want to be safe and I want the violence to stop, but I'm afraid my spouse will be killed. Or I have a record myself and I don't want to highlight myself by contacting law enforcement or participating with prosecution. Those are very real and very valid concerns. So we have to, in my dream, it would be not that we got rid of the criminal justice system, absolutely not, but that we had an avenue for victims to truly decide and have more space on what justice looks like for them. When we think about our traditional system now, the victims aren't even really, technically they're witnesses. They're not victims on paper, they're witnesses. And so when we think about justice, sometimes that gets lost in the weeds on what justice looks like for victims. Maybe justice for me means this person is removed from the community in some other way in a truly rehabilitative space, receiving actual support and services to reduce further harm in the community. Maybe justice for me looks like getting me back whole so that I'm not worried about not prosecuting my offender because they're the one that's the primary breadwinner, making people whole to where all those concerns that make it easier to go back into abusive situations, removing those away, allowing people to come up for air a bit more. And then that makes it a lot easier for them to navigate the criminal justice system should they decide. So I wish we had just both, because I know every day I've gotten calls from people that know I do domestic violence work. I've gotten calls in the middle of the night, like, this person has a gun, but they do not want to call the police. And for me, I'm like, well, you gotta call. I don't I can't show up. I can't do anything. But all we have are our traditional measures. And for people like that, like, what's next for them?
Okay. And Dawn, you are a survivor that became a defendant. What could have happened in your case? I know you've talked about it briefly, but elaborate on what could have happened that could have changed and you could have had a better outcome.
Well, for one, I will say what kind of helped, me not to use the gun on, because the thing is, I was resolved in my head, and we see a lot of people that have been criminalized for basically acting in self-defense. And I was to that point where I was like, okay, I'm not going through this anymore. And what did help me, as far, now this didn't help me with like not being criminalized for having a gun, but what did help me is having that sister circle, like that somebody that I could call. And I had to get away from the hush silent, I can't tell anybody about this, and I'm gonna have to tell somebody, because either I'm gonna die or this person is gonna die, and I'm gonna be in trouble. And so what helped me was to have a place to be able to go. Like, literally, I called one of my sisters, and she came and got me. Nobody died, nobody went to jail. Now, I did get criminalized, I did have a gun after that because I didn't feel safe, and I did get in trouble for that. And I think what could have helped is, for me not to be prosecuted for it, for there to be a more in-depth understanding why I felt that was needed, and for my security and safety to have been prioritized, and for me to be able to feel safe in other ways. Because when we think about it, like, I think what was said about people not wanting to call police and different things, I think that is true. We see that a lot of times. We have some of our sisters that have called the police in an abusive situation and ended up locked up right there on the spot. We have taken some of our sisters, they just had a very violent thing happen to them. We've taken them to different agencies and told them we do not want the police involved, and still a detective was calling them later on. And so I think to be able to have that sister circle, that community-based solution, though, like a real like a real reinforcement that my safety is important and my security concerns are important, that I deserve a place to go. Just like right now, we have a sister that we've been working on housing for that has been trying to escape. She has a lot of kids. And the other day, it was just really bad. Well, things were getting there, but now actually we found out that it's gotten to a real priority. So, but she took the car and went, with the kids, and now she's gotten, charged with, stealing the car. However, like we as a society and as a system, we have to show women that actually your lives are important. Like, we want you to survive, because I think the way that it is, and also knowing that like domestic violence, murders are so high in our state, it's like the way that it's currently set up is like people don't care if we live or die. And I would like, to see more community solutions that enforce the fact that my life is important and that I deserve to be able to live. I deserve to not have to die at the hands of someone that's abusing me, and my sisters deserve that as well.
Thank you. Let me go back to you, Ms. Perry Brianna, real quick. We've talked kind of around some alternatives to incarceration. For instance, in Dawn's circumstance, she had this gun. You have, I call it a technical violation, because I think it is, they're the totality of the circumstances. Anyone would understand why you have a gun. And people always say, get a gun and kill them, get a gun and go after them. The consequences of that, you end up in the criminal justice system, you end up in prison. But what is something that we could have done that would have been different? What are some of the alternatives that you're aware of?
Yeah, thank you for that question, Sharon. I think what's been helpful for me, especially in these past few years, has been studying the history of the domestic violence movement, the movement to end gender-based violence, and these women of color like organizing in the 1970s who turn to their communities, and kind of going back to what Dawn is saying, like this sister circle and community solutions, like they very much so were doing their work in the 1970s. So sometimes for me, it's just like, well, how can we not necessarily get back to that? Because, like we're like living in a different time period, but just to see that it was possible in the 70s, and I think there are possibilities now. And so when I think about some alternatives, and I definitely let Dawn talk more about this with the primary caregiver legislation that Free Hearts worked on, and I and thinking too about like getting to the root of these issues, like what is leading to this violence, what is leading to survivors not like being supported, and thinking about how can we meet those needs and see that as like an alternative. Like, what does it look like for people to have a guaranteed basic income, guaranteed access to housing, jobs, childcare? Childcare is also a big one. And how can we take that seriously as like an investment in alternatives? And so in addition to that, there's some transformative justice work that Healthy and Free Tennessee is involved in. And again, it's like trying to get to the root causes of, harm and violence and why that's occurring, and how can we, have restorative conversations, again, like try to get people's needs met so they have everything that they need in order to survive and thrive, and not continuously like faced with these situations. And so those are some of the things that come to mind. But again, definitely know like Dawn could talk more about the primary caregiver bill, because I definitely think that's a step in the right direction.
Okay. Well, we'll move to that, because I do want to give the other panelists the opportunity to give us one last, sort of call to action. But I'll go to you, Dawn. Let's talk about that legislation.
Okay, yeah. So in 2019, we passed community-based alternatives to incarceration for primary care giver law, and it's also called primary caretakers. And we were actually, as a part of the National Council for Incarcerated and Formerly Incarcerated Women and Girls, we were actually the second state to pass it. The first state was Massachusetts, and we were the second state. And now actually Missouri passed it this year. And basically it's to where primary caregivers of dependent children, or if they're caregivers of other people within their family, that they will be able to get an alternative in the community that actually they can be held accountable, but it kind of address the root cause of what they're in there for. So whether it's they need family and individual counseling, whether they need some kind of a more structured program, that they can actually have that as their sentence and keep their families together, while, being accountable. And so, yeah, I'm glad, Brianna, that you brought this up. And this is something this year, well, in this session, we've been working on getting some monitoring going, because what we've been seeing in the implementation of it is that a lot of times those the motions are being denied for different reasons that we think are counterintuitive to, for example, if someone has the illness of addiction or something like that, I think that, rehabilitation in the community is a lot more effective than for the family, for the mom, and for the parent, and for the child. And there's a lot of scientific evidence about that. So we're trying to get some monitoring on it to see actually how it's being used, how it's being denied. And also we want to be able to push for the cost savings, because we had a pretty conservative fiscal note that said, okay, we'll probably save $1 million. I think it said about 10 people being able to get out, but we know more people than that have used it to get out across the state already. And so we want to be able to see how much money this is actually saving the state, so that we can funnel some of this money into funding community based alternatives in the community, so that we can keep people's families together by holding them accountable in the community, and really just have that wraparound services, just like I mentioned, that sister circle that can keep us all safe, but in our communities, and community infrastructure to build for the long term.
Okay, and one reason this is very important is one thing we do at the YW, we educate legislators. We don't, engage in political activity, but we do provide professional guidance and education to legislators. And so if there's legislation that needs to be tweaked or enhanced, then we do work with different members of the legislative community so that they will know. So, legislation is passed and it may not have the effect that it should have. If that's the case, it may need some additional tweaking. All right, a few last statements. I'll let Latoya address anything that she would have as something to leave our audience with, last words of wisdom.
Yes, thank you so much, Sharon, and thank you to the rest of the panelists. I've learned so much just being in your company this hour today. What I would add is that I think Nashville will be the safest community in the country as we continue these partnerships, as we expand what empathy looks like for all victims, as we take a closer look at where we lack empathy, where we lack accuracy and expanded justice for the most marginalized amongst us. I think we are in a great position of power to impact a great deal of change and reduce the trauma that people are experiencing and will be, re-traumatized as they continue on with the system if we don't make these enhancements and, just expand our reach beyond our traditional methods. So I'm really appreciative of the work of Dawn and Brianna and the initiative of the YWCA, as well as the dedication of our partners like Judge Escobar and Chief Richter and all of the great work that's being done here. I know we're in a great position to really expand the reach and prevent more and more victims from falling through the cracks.
Okay, before we start Q&A, Judge Escobar, I'll give you the opportunity to address the audience and anything that you feel as though we can do. I know, thankful, we do have Chief Rector. We have wonderful people on the bench. We have wonderful people in the police force. We have wonderful people who work at the Family Safety Center. But we need to visualize Nashville being the safest city for women and children. We need to make sure that we don't criminalize women who are just trying to survive, and we should help them thrive. So I'll go to Judge Escobar.
Well, I would ask Dawn and Brianna to please educate the judiciary, educate victim witness coordinators, defense attorneys, prosecutors, probation officers, It is not your responsibility to do it, but I would ask you to please do it, because we need to hear these things. We need to understand, criminal law has changed so much in the last 25 years that I've been practicing. And I hope that it's becoming more empathetic, more humane, but we need your help. And so we all need more education and more enlightenment. So I would ask y'all, and I would invite y'all to come speak.
And I will say this because I know that Judge Escobar has reached out to me and I was totally out of my element and my depth about what about this. So it is very helpful for people that are at the grassroots level to make sure that those that we know and make sure, because there's some weight behind the collective and we could get these things changed, because this is a very, very important project. We have a question that I wanted to address to this group, and anyone can respond. But they were asking, is it true that a child who has been sexually assaulted continues to be in an abusive relationship as an adult? This is sort of what we know as a cycle of violence, that someone who grows up in violence will continue and either become a victim or become an abuser. And Dawn, I see you shaking your head. Can you address this?
Well, just really quickly, we know that hurt people. Even in my situation, these are the people that committed violence against me. They had seen violence all throughout their lives and hated that part of themselves. That's why I thought that would never be an issue. And then it resorted to that. And so, and we see this all the time. And, I think, yes, the answer is yes. And I think that is speaking to the healing that we, really need within our community. And I think even with that, like, we need to get to the bottom of it so that it doesn't keep going generation after generation. Like, we have to, as a community, figure out how to address these things, because we know that that's an issue. And I even have some family members that I worry about because of them knowing some things that they've experienced as young people, and just seeing people my age that, and older, that have experienced those things and have also acted out those things as well. And so I think as a community, we have to have a lot more of these conversations and, really have to get to some healing for ourselves, some generational healing, because yes, I think the short answer is yes. We see that all the time.
And I know that one of our programs at the YW is our Men Together program, and we promote healthy masculinity among young men. And we have this in the public school system. And one of the reasons the program is so important is that we do realize that we're going to have to make sure these young people who have experienced such significant violence understand that they do not have to take that path. And that takes a lot of work. It takes even more than the men program. It takes counseling for kids who were witnesses of domestic violence, because when they come into the Weaver Center, and that's really the extreme case, they are worked with. And what these children have seen is so mind altering. And, you can't help but just feel for them, but we have to do our best as a society when they leave the comfort and the loving embrace of the Weaver Center and they go to a classroom. We have to make sure all the teachers understand the trauma that these children have faced. My mother, a lifelong educator, used to say, I can't imagine how some of these kids even make it to school, no less trying to perform in a classroom. And so we have to be sensitive to that, because we don't want to have that. And it's another subject, the school to prison pipeline. We have to break that chain also. Does anyone else want to respond or say anything on that question of the children and the cycle of violence? Brianna, did you have a comment?
I think it was pretty much covered. Just want to uplift the need for like education around like healthy relationships. We also push for comprehensive sex education, which includes healthy relationships. And you know, unfortunately, that's outlawed in the state of Tennessee right now. But anyway, just to say that, yes, like Don already said, like, yes, that's true to the question and like what's needed in order to help to combat it.
Okay, and Latoya, there are some services for children as part of the Family Safety Center. Can you go into that?
Yeah, so we have just very recently hired a new child trauma specialist whose role is to be proactive about how we serve children that come into our center, whether they are the primary victims or secondary victims. And that was actually going to lead right to what I wanted to add to this piece. It's that we have to envision serving the whole family system because, for example, here at the Family Safety Center, we have a great play area for kids to play in. And yeah, that's fun for kids, but that makes it easier for parents and caregivers, primarily mothers, to be able to come and receive the services they need and not have to worry about how their child is going to be enriched. Because oftentimes caretaking and caring for our children will stop us in our path. Like we could be going full steam ahead. If I've been conducting trainings and my kids' daycare will call and I will stop the training and answer to address my children. And so knowing that there are victims of interpersonal violence that have all these needs, it's not just them, it's also their children who are greatly resilient. And yes, children are more who have been exposed to violence are more likely to be victimized later. Rather, most kids will not grow up to be abusers. Most boys will not grow up to be abusers. Most girls will not grow up to be victimized. So we have to look at these family systems as a whole to make sure we're serving everyone and we are exploring what justice looks like for the comprehensive unit, not parceling out folks. And I mean that as far as parceling out victims and offenders. I will add, the National Children's Alliance is also co-located here at the Family Safety Center at 610 Murfreesboro Pike. So anyone that has needs related to victims of severe child abuse and child sexual abuse, we partner with the National Children's Alliance is co-located. We also partner with Our Kids. So we are here, we are welcome, and we welcome you, and we are here for all victims of interpersonal violence.
Thank you. And I want to thank this panel, and we could go on forever. And there are a couple of other questions that unfortunately we don't have the opportunity to address. But I will say this, at the YW, we want to act as a connector. We want to make sure that the people on this call, now you know each other, now you understand what each other provides as part of this really complex equation of justice. Because our mission is eliminating racism, empowering women, promoting peace, justice, freedom, and dignity for all. And that last portion of this mission statement, I always emphasize, because this is about justice, and it's a justice for all people. And I'm the kind of person that there's a system out there, but we need to challenge that system, because those who fall outside what we view as societal norms, that are misplaced societal norms, need this community to offer them that extra support. So I thank you all. This has been tremendous. And we're going to work together because this is our mission and this is what we do. So thank you so much for being here. Thank you for your time, and have a rest and wonderful day. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for having us.
Yeah, thank you all.
Nice to meet you, Brianna. And I met you years and years ago, Dawn. It's good to see you again. And good to, of course, always see you, Judge Escobar.
Yeah, nice to meet you all too.
It's good to see you again. Take care, y'all.
Okay.
You too.
Bye.
Bye.